my fascinating chat with Manuel Rendon of Timeplast. Well, hello there. A quick primer for people who aren't quite familiar with plastics, plastic manufacturing, and 3D printing. And as you know, that's one of the fun passions I have is 3D printing and designing stuff. The charms that are available for people to take, the psych charms, are printed in something called PLA. And people who do 3D printing print in various plastics. There's ABS, PLA, TPU, etc. Each one has its own properties. There's even ones that have carbon fibers within them to make them incredibly strong, and so forth. They are very stinky and sometimes dangerous to print with. They emit something called volatile organic compounds, and PLA less so than ABS. Anyway, PLA is supposed to be relatively biodegradable. So one of the first prints I ever did when I got my 3D printer was a little thing I designed for my patio table, and it's gone through 6 or so harsh Wisconsin winters, and it hasn't degraded in any way, shape, or form, including the tiny little hinge I designed on it. It hasn't even discolored. So I certainly question the biodegradability of the current products out there, but what we're about to hear is a discussion with a gentleman who has essentially found the holy grail of what plastics could be for the world. It's an amazing, fascinating, game-changing thing. So enjoy the conversation, hopefully as much as I did. Well, hey there, welcome back. I'm here with Manuel Rendon. Hello there.
Hi, hello. How are you?
I'm well. I'm so glad you were able to join us. And as I normally do with people, I ask who they are and what they do. So if you could tell us who you are and what you do, and however you'd like to answer that.
Thank you. That's a great introduction. So I'm the founder of Timeplast, and well, I am an environmental engineer, and I just have a deep love for science, chemistry in particular, and one thing led to another. But I think I'm an avid enthusiast for technology.
Mm. Well, I can certainly relate to that. I think I'm also an avid enthusiast for technology, everything from 3D printing to AI and coding and so forth. So, and I do find that you just sort of follow your passion and your brain that way, because it's hard to stay in one little tunnel and you'll keep leaking out to other places. And, and I think the fascinating thing is when two technologies meet and you have environmental and plastics at the same time, and you've created something just amazing.
Thank you. Yes, it's been a long journey, to be honest. The idea that has been in the back of my mind for the longest time is um, how is the future of humanity is going to look like? And so I was blown away the first time I heard about the Kardashev scale, which essentially, when the physicists look in outer space for alien life, they don't look for the tiny green man. They look for signs of a type 1, type 2, and type 3 civilizations. And, and so right now we're type 0 and you're trying to move forward. And I think that plastic is definitely one of the most important challenges that we have. It's definitely an existential threat, and but it's so difficult to evaluate that issue that it's been overlooked. I think up until recent years, in which the studies are now, um, I would say, irrefutable. So if you look at what people talked about plastic pollution back in the day, they were more concerned about microplastic pollution, right? The fact that you see straws in the uh, in the nostrils of a turtle, or you see plastic floating in the oceans and whatnot. But that's not real. That seems to be more like an aesthetic problem if you think about it. However, the real problem is the microplastic pollution, the microplastification, because now microplastics are a biomagnification factor. In other words, it accumulates in the tissue of living organisms, and then its generation, you have a higher and higher concentration. There has been a number of biomagnification factors in the past, like lead and others, but the difference is that they were affected by water. So they were, in a way, they were water soluble. So if you had lead poisoning back in the day, you just needed to take a few treatments and wait a few years and you were going to be fine. But since plastic repels water down to the molecular level, um, there's nothing we can do about them, right? And it becomes like what happens if you put a plastic glove on your hand? Well, nothing will happen, immediately. But what if you leave it there for 50 years? So that's the question that we're looking at right now. And studies show how mothers are passing their microplastics level to the babies in the womb, and how each generation of humans have a higher concentration of this. At which point, it's a question we're going um, to have a real existential threat linked to reproductive levels and other issues. So I think this is definitely one of the most important and overlooked existential threats that we have right now.
Well, I 100% agree with what you just said, and it's interesting that you've taken something that is such a global issue, a global humanitarian issue, and you've packaged it into something that people will see and say, "Oh, I could get some water soluble supports for my print. Oh, cool." because that's what people will see on the surface with some of your products, but there's so much more to it than that. You have something behind that.
Oh,
It's almost
absolutely.
Yeah, it's like offering a food that tastes good to people and it's fun, but it's saving them in a way because it's making them healthier in the long run as a society.
Right. No, the 4D printing filaments for 3D printing conventional uh, manufacturing is a byproduct of our portfolio of materials. You see, we developed from scratch a new type of material that's 70% composed of water. And thank God that ChatGPT exists nowadays. And because when I used to say that, people wouldn't just immediately wouldn't believe how is something dry, 70% water. It's so counterintuitive. But you can ask ChatGPT. It's real. There is in fact 70% of water in our materials, and a quick way to test it out is just by putting it in a microwave. Microwaves are meant to excite only water molecules, polar molecules. And so if you put a conventional plastic in microwave, nothing happens. But if you put a time-lapse plastic, it'll explode or blow up, right? Boil. So what happened, I think, is that humanity, discovered non-polar materials or materials that repel water, and they were like, okay, this is, incredible, because we definitely need to keep water out of food and whatever. But that's a misconception of the grand chemistry of our planet, and the grand chemistry of even our own bodies. Everything needs to have the biochemistry of our bodies. For example, it needs to have water as a universal solvent. If you contradict that, let's say fundamental fact, then you are contradicting, you know, this grand chemistry, and everything becomes a problem after that point and on. So the question is, how do you make a water soluble material water resistant at the same time so that you can use it for a period of time? So it's 70% of the earth is covered in water. Even our own body's composition, it's about 70% water too. It seems like the magic number. So for a reason, I think it all answers to what Franz Bacon said. He said that nature, to be commanded, must be obeyed, and we're kind of looking at that right now with the plastic. So we had this material, but it's difficult to put it out to sell it. So I thought to myself, I definitely need to have a direct to consumer product so that we could use some of the most powerful tools that humanity have ever invented, which is AI and the internet. But how do I sell a raw material to the consumer? It's impossible. So or very, very difficult. So I thought, okay, I maybe I need just to create a product that's consumer oriented. That's why we have the 3D printing filaments. But since you can program the time it takes for these filaments to dissolve in the presence of water, you could be talking about four-dimensional objects, which I think it's the most interesting part about our
Oh,
filaments.
oh, absolutely. And that was one of the things I really jumped out at me is your use of that term. I've recently had a podcast episode called "How Much Real Estate Do You Own in the Fourth Dimension?" And it was a different way to look at time management, where you own that real estate tomorrow for that hour. That's you bought that. You're there. And this is the same thing where you're saying, well, this isn't just a three-dimensional object. We've sort of programmed it to not exist under the right circumstances in 2 days, 2 months, 2 years, or so forth, depending on what you go with. And for those listening, my understanding is you have 4 versions of this right now. You have a quick one, not so quick, slower, and very slow decomposition. Is that about right?
Yes, that's right. And we just came back from Germany to a 3D printing convention. I think one of the largest in the world, if not the largest, Formnext in Frankfurt. And the 3D printing community is very advanced, and the mindset is it's scientific oriented. However, our filaments, even for that community, were counterintuitive, because how do you program the time, or what is the fourth dimension, and what are you going to do with it? People are thinking in terms of, okay, I have these files that I printed before. What is your filament going to improve in terms of what I already can print? And I noticed that it's just that there's an incredible lack of the additional dimension of time in the 3D printing community, that nobody really knows what to do with it, which is why I came up with a new 4-dimensional object myself, which I call Bluminite, and it's by one of my other companies, Tree and Cubed. So the idea is to grow a tree in the middle of the Sahara Desert, right? So how do you grow a tree without human intervention? It's very difficult to do, which is why you still see the Sahara Desert as it is right now. And it's because that tree would need water, attention, care for a long period of time, years, before it can fully grow and stand by itself. And the way you do that with a 4-dimensional object is that you can now design the time it will take for each one of those layers and channels in an intricate object. Let's call it the seed pod, in order for that pot to dissolve in the presence of water. So it's like an analog computer in which water would be the battery, right? And so you have a water container on top, and then at the bottom you have the seed uh, compartment, and then that seed chamber is going to be connected to the water chamber via these channels. Each specific channel will have a specific timetable, so that, let's say that the first channel will dissolve in about 2 days, the second channel will dissolve in 2 weeks, and so on and so forth, so that the seed can be receiving water and nutrients for years into the future without any human intervention. And that's very simple to do. For example, if you buy one of our filaments, let's say the active filament, it will dissolve one of those layers, which are about 0.3 millimeters thick. It will dissolve in about 5 minutes. But if you create, let's say, a 5-layer wall, then it will dissolve in 25 minutes. And if you need something to last longer, then you change the filament, and so on and so forth. And that's just one of the many applications I can think of for a 4-dimensional filament, in which you can not only play with the 3 typical dimensions, but also the dimension of time.
Right, exactly. And so I have 3 things from what you just said, which is wonderfully informative. First of all, I've seen the object you're talking about. It looks almost like a polyhedron. It's
Yeah.
it's a very, very alien-looking object. I think it's really
It's a
neat to look at.
dodecahedron.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it is. Oh, it is a dodecahedron. Okay,
Yes.
so it is literally it's a 20-sided die. Is that dodecahedron? Yeah, 20-sided die. Yeah, right.
I think it's 22.
Okay, because a dodecahedron's 20. Okay, that's really neat.
20. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really neat. It's a very interesting look. It's a very high-tech looking device. And you answered the programmability
I'm sorry.
question.
It's 12 sides, of course. I'm just lost.
Oh, okay, that's all right.
Yeah.
It's
Take that and out, it would be 24.
okay. It is it's a really interesting thing that you answered the question of programmability, because people will hear that word and they'll say, well, how do I program with a static object that I'm just going to print with? And it makes complete sense. It's sort of related to, there was a and I think they were featured at Formnext last year or so, but they were a company that actually made shoes, and they could change the flexibility by the infill pattern. So that it's the same substance, but it reacted differently. And in this way, you're saying, if 1 layer goes away in X minutes, well, then 2 layers goes away in 2 times X minutes or so. And that way you can program it to to do what you needed to do in a certain amount of time. So you're literally programming the time into it in the same way that if you had a glow in the dark print, the thicker you make it, the more light it's going to retain. And so you're kind of programming how much light it can store as well. So I think that's a really neat dimension of control you've given people that they simply didn't have yet, that now they have that.
Yes, and it's been quite the challenge for us to explain, the benefits of a four-dimensional filament, which is why we've also start selling our materials as a support filament, because PVA, which is the only other really out there commercial water soluble filament, it's meant for support structures. It's very brittle, and it has its benefits.
Mhm.
But by the same token, we've spoken with several people that use, for example, large scale printing, and they have problems with removing PBA because it's so brittle that you cannot just take it apart in a single um, stroke. But time blast, it's also an elastometer, so it would behave as TPU, and even more flexible than TPU, but also like PVA with regards to water solubility. So you can just remove this support either by putting it in water for a few seconds and then just taking in, pulling it away. It will, in a single pull, you can take most of the support structure. And so people already have the idea of a support in their minds. So we're selling a support structure, which is essentially the same time plus active filament, but people understand support better, so we just label it different. But it's the same material. Well, it's slightly different in few characteristics, but essentially it's the same as an active filament. Our idea is, yeah, to allow the community to have just a new dimension to play with.
Mhm. And it is amazing how you can release something like that, even if you didn't give a lot of instructions or parameters, but you gave them the basics, and to find that there are going to be people who suddenly come up with just amazing ideas from that. And to that end, I wondered if you had considered some sort of contest for people to actually come up with uses, very unique and wonderful uses for a programmable material like that. And because when I first saw it and I read about it, I thought this is almost like an answer to a question we haven't quite figured out yet. Like, I've seen the applications, especially the bio related ones, like the planting of the tree. There was something mentioned about swimsuits and so forth. But I feel like there's even a greater thing there. I feel like this is something that could be very powerful for, like, safety. Just an example is, what happens a lot is when people are driving, they go off the road and they go into water. A lot of the problem is sometimes they can't get their seatbelts off. And imagine if the seatbelt just dissolved in that much water, then you wouldn't have that problem anymore. Or a component of the car would do something like that. I think safety is a huge application for this. Safety and also growth, gardening, and so forth.
Oh yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you. Definitely a contest would be incredible. We're definitely going to take notes on that, and potentially release something. I think it's a great idea. No, yeah, I agree with you. The we In order for us to, well, we were writing down the script for the video of the new filament. We thought to ourselves, okay, how do we explain this? How do we really portray the idea of a four-dimensional object? And the only way for us, not the only, but the best idea that we had for the script then was to create the step-by-step process of going from a dissolvable bikini, which is very easy to understand, to going to the self-destructing bottle of water, which is more complex to understand. So, yeah, it's very silly, to talk about a dissolvable bikini, and we do talk about it on the radio so that people can understand. Okay, in the presence of water, this surface can disappear, it can dissolve. However, you don't need an ocean for this technology to work. I say on that video, because now you can just program different layers in the design, and one of those layers could be just a water container, and you can inject water in one of those in between layers, so you can know for a fact that those, whatever you wanted to dissolve, will dissolve even if you're not swimming in the ocean.
Mhm.
So that you can create, like I said on that video, like a self-destructing bottle of water. Imagine, for example, a small pill that releases, or what reaches its inner contain uh, con- compartment, in a specific amount of time, let's say 2 weeks, and the that inner compartment has, let's say, a red pigment, so that you know when the milk is about to expire because the milk is going to turn red. Or what if you create just a bottle, a 3D printed bottle, and you put water in the wall layer so that the bottle will turn red right before it's about to self-destruct. So you know you need to take it off the shelves. And then if you put the precise amount of water, then you will have zero plastic waste already pre-programmed into the object that you are looking to throw away. So there are many ways for us to really deal with a fourth dimension, but I think it's beyond that. I think it's that when you tap into the uh, evolutionary dynamics of our world, you get so much further ahead with much more advanced technologies. I haven't seen a single technology that humans have that is not really following the path of nature, right? And so I think the plastic pollution, for example, the best way to deal with it is through water solubility. It's the only planetary cleaning system that we have. And if we're pumping out tons and tons of materials that repel water, then we're in for a big trouble, in terms of sustainability.
Hmm. I a comment on what you're talking about in the water bottle. The first thing that comes to mind is imagine just somebody who's a hobby printer. They print something that looks like an upside down water bottle with barriers between, let's say, X amount of ounces, and then they turn that upside down, and now they have a plant waterer that, on a timed release, gives the plant its water every day or what have you, just because it eats through the barrier, dissolves it, and then waters the plant. It's something so simple like that could be printed so easily,
Yeah.
and you could vary the thickness of the barriers to give more time, which is back to the programmability, which I think is such a neat thing. The I was going to ask you, so switching gears slightly, um, one of the umbrellas I use with Alchemy for Life is that time is made of three things. Life is made of three things: time, energy, and resources. So I'm fascinated with that. I'm fascinated how people spend those things and receive those things. And so, as an engineer and inventor, what would you say your current role? How do you manage that? How do you manage your energy when it comes to creativity, and managing the company and ideas and things like that? Does that make sense as a question fully?
Oh yeah, no, no, absolutely. I think that we give ourselves titles, artificial titles. For example, when you go to college, but in reality, you are who you are, and I just cannot avoid being myself. And so, since I was very young, I remember just thinking in physics terms, everything that I would look at. And my first job after I graduated from college was at PepsiCo. And my first and only job, by the way.
Hmm.
It was such a great uh, learning space for me. And I I think that creativity by itself it cannot thrive growing a business. It's an incredible difficult task. You're up against the likes of already big companies with incredible inertia, and you only have by your side innovation. The fact that these companies are so big that it's difficult for them to innovate and to change gears. But with a smaller company, you can do that, which is why you see the modern research and development department would be merging and acquisition, or the fact that most big technologies come from smaller companies, not the big ones that you would expect 3M, DuPont, or Shell to come up with Timeplast. But that's not the case, and it happens, in many aspects. In my case, I think that it's a very interesting point in my life to be able to to fund my ideas. But by the same token, I think it it's in our nature, right? Which is why maybe it's difficult for somebody to find a college degree that teaches you everything to be successful at the entrepreneurial side of the equation. So there's a lot of decisions that you need to take up based on God, and you need to follow your instinct in many ways. So it's quite the complex question, though. In all honesty, I think that my passion is to to take to help society to become a type 1 civilization, and that fueled my because otherwise nothing really matters if you think about it. If we just cease to exist as a society, if we go extinct, what are we doing here? What do we even wake up in the mornings? So the only thing for me is just, I need to put my grain of sand here and help humanity reach that. And so that's what fueled me really. And then, thank God I had this ease for science, and one thing led to another. But it's definitely not a the easiest of the jobs, to be honest.
No, I can understand that, and there are a number of people who are hearing this that understand that as well. And that when you the power comes from when you combine skills together. I mean, you can be great as an inventor, but if you have no idea about companies or marketing or development and so forth, maybe you'll file a patent and maybe you won't. And I know that you have a number of patents, and I know of at least one that's pending as well. So you certainly have been doing your due diligence on that stuff. So that's really cool to see. I tend to be very attracted to talking to people who I call dual brained, where they have the logistics and logic, and then they have the creativity, and they kind of fight it out constantly. And that's something I've had to deal with for a long time. So it takes one to know one kind of thing. So I think it's an amazing thing to have the creativity to say, I can create something from nothing, and then kind of ponder, well, where did that come from? And then also switch back to the logistics and logic and say, well, here's my hierarchy of how this is going to work, and I'm going to apply what I know about science and structure and so forth to that. So it's a really amazing thing to see.
Oh, now I can get your question a little bit better. Now that you elaborated on this side. No, yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a balance between creativity and business. If you just go all out on creativity, it's harder for you to be able to you make it turn a profit on that idea. And when you come up with a functional, let's say in my case, a chemical pathway that would solve an issue that has never been solved before, you have two ways to go about it. You either make a peer review scientific publication on a scientific magazine, and your goal would be, I don't know, Nobel Prize, let's say, at the end of that road, or you take the path of a patent, so for you to be able to create a business, to have a kind of a legal monopoly there. Of course, there's a lot less prestige on going the patent side of the equation, but by the same token, you have an opportunity to create value, to a certain degree. In our case, we I was working more on the service side of the equation. I worked for PepsiCo. I remember, one of our meetings with Brad Rogers, the then director of packaging discovery of PepsiCo. We're trying to, solve the problem of plastic pollution and single-use packaging. And I noticed that my solutions for the problems were so counterintuitive, so out of the ordinary, that I said to myself, you know what, maybe I need to to create my own company. And one of the first patents that we had, well, actually, the first one was acquired by Nestle. Nestle, they are using a chemical technology to upcycle PET, turn PET into terephthalic and ethylene glycol, and one of those technologies is ours. And so and if you Google Timeplast Nestle, you're gonna see what happened between us. It's a great story. It's just that Nestle Global wanted to let go of all of the PET businesses because, I guess, bad publicity or something. So Blue Trident came in and acquired Nestle Waters North America, and so all of these technologies took a back seat, if you will. But by the same token, it was a great experience. So I wanted to become like a service company, to create a first service company to provide solutions for the chemical, technology side of the equation. But after a while, I noticed that I had such a tremendous ability, or a number of technologies that were doing its own thing by themselves. So I said, why don't I create a single material that could encapsulate everything we know about chemistry? And that's what Timeplats is. So essentially we had a black canvas, and we said, okay, if we were able to create from a new material from scratch, you know, using the first principle mentality, how is that going to look like? And so first of all, it has to be a polar material. In other words, a water soluble material, so that we are adapting to the grand chemistry of our planet, and then everything was falling into place. So, but I've been looking for the shiny object so many times. Actually, yesterday, my team was like, "Okay, why don't we focus on this?" And then, because I'm coming up with paints, I'm coming up with glues, fishing lines, and just a number electro sublimation solutions. To the
Hmm.
consumer, that my own team is like, okay, we need to focus here. I mean, let the creativity flow, but in to the business, let's just focus on one or two products. And there's got to be a balance for sure. But yes, I am the visionary more than the the businessman, if you think about it.
Hmm. And that's hard to do. No one is 50-50. And most people are very, I don't want to use the term unbalanced, but they typically focus on one grand thing, and that's it, and they let the other people handle that part. But when you're able to sort of have, you're internally talking, it's a lot easier than externally sort of designing something and then saying, well, how does that market, or how's that going to function, and what's the cost of that, and what's the impact. But if you're doing all that processing internally, it's a lot more efficient, because it's just you having this conversation with yourself. And that's why some people who are engineers can just come up with these amazing things that would take R&D departments months and months to come up with, because they've done all that internal bubble sorting, if you will, of things in their database to sort of figure that out, which is, I think it's really amazing. And it's hard to, you have to walk a fine line between saying, okay, focus, but also saying, well, wait, don't stop having those ideas. Well, which one do you want? So you kind of have to bounce back and forth between that. And I was reading one of your documents that talked about you being a serial inventor, and I immediately, the hairs on my neck went up when I read that, because I don't like that term. I think that the word serial has been hijacked to mean a lack of commitment, and that's not what it means. And it's been applied to dating. So someone will call someone a serial dater because they have a lot
Yeah.
of dates, but they're looking for a person. They're going to keep dating until they find that person. So serial just means a series of things that are similar. And I think it's the same for inventing. You can't have a creative mind and create things and go, well, I don't know that stuff. Well, that's how you got here to begin with. You didn't know that stuff at one point. And you may create what seems like two dissimilar things, but they're not. And if I can be allowed to babble a little longer here, I did research. Some of a couple of my books are experimental psychology, and I um I I had created a dating site from scratch. I had created a writing site. I wrote some books. I was a full stack web developer. I ended up being an aerial photographer just for fun and so forth. And I was looking at all these things, and I'm thinking, you know what, Mark, just grow up, pick something. And then I realized they all came from the same place. It was my ability to recognize something from an angle that most people didn't, and then to distill, disseminate, design, create. So I was doing that same thing, but to the outside world, it may look like things that are completely unrelated. It's not. It comes from the same core. And I think when you get in touch with what your core does, then you just do, and whatever happens, happens. And it sounds like that's what you do. So now that I've talked for 10 minutes, do you have any response to what I said about serial inventing and
Oh
things?
yeah, no, 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 absolutely no. Thank you for that. Oh, absolutely. I would. I think that's definitely a very good description of me. If you think about it. Even though I only have 7 patents, it's just because of budget. I have written down
Only seven.
thousand, at least 1,000 patents. You wouldn't believe it. It's. I think that I have also 100% approval rate on my patent applications in the U.S. And it's not. I think it's because it's actually new ideas and concept, and I've been growing and I don't. By the way, I'm gonna come out in your show, I guess, in your podcast here. But I've been growing inside of me an idea that's bigger than I think that than anything that we can accomplish by ourselves, and it's the idea of a new city, if you will. There's so many inventions and so many things that you can do when you program the time for a material, and that you can really come up with a new type of society altogether. And so I've been coming up with this idea of I call it a singular city, in which essentially uh, I would be combining the likes of gaming science, massively multiplayer role playing games with 3D printing, handheld 3D printers, electro sublimation, and cryptocurrency to come up with, and also, of course, the concept of floating structures and rest communities, or free surface, planetary surface out in the international waters, so that we can kind of do something like the Homestead Act of 1862, if I'm right on that, in which the government gave free land to U.S. citizens, provided they would, cultivate the land and whatnot for 5 years. So I think that we can do something like that too. I cannot fathom how a young, healthy human being in this planet can, it's gonna be spending his entire life to pay for a house and a vehicle. You know what I mean? I think it's we have an incredible potential, not only in terms of technology, but also in terms of our own species being so advanced that this makes no sense. For me, I'm thinking, I don't know if you play World of Warcraft, but I'm thinking on, okay, we're going to assign to you this lot of surface in, in international waters, which belongs to nobody, and I'm going to give you um this uh, training processes in which you're going to be learning how to build your own world, if you will. So think about, you entered, let's say, the Universal Studio theme park, but instead of going to a ride for just entertainment, you're learning a skill, right? So you learn how to make blocks with a handgun 3D printing. Think about the 3D pen that you create the Eiffel Tower, for example, the 3D doodler, something like that, but bigger, in which you can just create walls and structures by yourself, and then you learn how to make this stuff on these 2-minute rides, and then you work there to a point in which you're earning money by doing these tasks that you won't be able to leave. If you want to stay, you can stay there for as long as you want, and eventually you're going to be able to build your own house, your own vehicle, and everything else out in the oceans. I think it's a crazy idea, but if you think about it, when we put the entire weight of human civilization in our own species, as individuals, and we can really hit it off the park. So I made a video actually about it. Nobody had seen, but the idea behind this is to free humans from the burden, I think, that society has. There's an economic burden on every day humans, I think, which is why it takes 20, 30 years for anybody to own a house, an average person. I think it's nonsensical, and I think we can change that. Which is why probably the birth rate is dropping. So there's so many inventions. The electrosublimation is a big one. If you have a hydrolyzed material to 70%, like Timeplast, and you use microwaves with such little energy, you can form that material, because the energy, it's going to be directly heating up the molecules instead of just uh, passing through other less efficient pathways. But I think it's yeah, you touch a nerve there, and yeah, definitely. If I had a limited budget, I would have invented so many things, and I plan to release all my patents in the future. It's just that right now I have a fiduciary responsibility to take Timplast to in a profitable stage. But eventually, I think that many of these patents would have to be released so that we create competition, which always is good for business.
Hmm. Well, that's really amazing. And you reminded me a bit of something Elon Musk had said about his patents on his vehicles and so forth, and that though he holds the patents, he wouldn't pursue them because he wanted to give the other companies an ability to sort of start to stand up a little bit on their own, which I think is really a really cool thing. And again, you're balancing the mindset of somebody who just wants to freely design, create, and give with someone who has to allow other people to pay their bills. So, that's probably a difficult position to be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's definitely possible. The first thing that I would like to change at a planetary level on, and at least in terms of a concept, is with a new technology we call PABIS. If you go to timeplast.com, you can see that device. But in order for me to frame it well, think about you're in the middle of a Marvel movie. Let's say, I don't know, the Thor movie, and you're taken to this planet, this advanced civilization, the planet of Thor, home planet of Thor, and you're walking down the streets. Imagine that you're a chemist yourself, and you're walking down the streets, and you see everybody throwing their post-consumer product. Let's say your bottle of water, your straws, your papers, everything you're throwing into this seemingly bottomless trash can, in which everything magically disappears when it touches um, the device. And you're like, look, I'm a chemist. And how is that possible? It looks like magic. And it happens that in that advanced civilization, the person working with you was another chemist from that civilization. And he's like, oh, look, I'm a chemist too. And this is just dissolution. This is not magic. And you're like, okay, but there's not a single solvent to dissolve all types of plastic. PET requires, I don't know, benzene, polyethylene requires a heptane. And so, how did you, there's not a single solvent for all plastics. And the chemist from Thor planet, he's gonna tell you, yes, but there's one solvent for all water soluble plastics. Of course, water. So essentially, that advanced civilization were making all of their waste disappear because those materials were all water soluble. That's the one thing they have in common. And we've proven at Timeplast that we can make, extrusion sheets for, let's say, to-go containers, or extrusion straws. But we can also do, blow molding like bottles. We can do everything essentially that you can think of. So imagine a device. Well, you can go to Timeplast.com and take a look at it. But we patented this device, which is essentially like a hot uh, uh, water reactor, in which you can throw anything that's water soluble, and it will molecularly disintegrate that down to the carbon to carbon level. So organics will be easily recycled, the metals and glass too. But all plastic can just dissolve, which is the difficult part of recycling. It's just plastic, which is why they have a number underneath. Number one cannot be recycled with number two, because they're incompatible. Well, if they're water soluble, you don't have that issue. So we're actually receiving next. We're gonna be receiving our first prototype of Papis, and I'm thinking of making a an Apple style, kind of 2007 Steve Jobs presentation, in which I'm just gonna be doing everything that you do every day, but now your single use waste is going to be fully molecularly either recycled. Has two options. You can upcycle the material. Again, this is what I did for Nestle, and from Timeplast, just chemical recycle. You cannot imagine how complex it is for you to chemical recycle conventional plastics. You need toxic solvents to break down those polymers into monomers, clean those up, and then you know um, distill all those toxic solvents and whatnot. But still, I don't think it's safe, in all honesty, to do this at the societal level. But with a water soluble material, think about how clean it is. You're just using water for that same purpose, and so it's so elegant and simple that I think it's going to revolutionize the way we think about post-consumer plastic, because the shift from non-polar plastics to polar plastic is just a click of a button. I think it's you can definitely use the same equipment to convert polar plastics. Um, the same equipment you're using right now to do non-conventional, I mean non-polar plastics, and you can have this same habits. Instead of your just having a bottomless trash can at your house, you can have it at the society level, right? In which you have a huge habits, and it was just essentially a hot water reactor, and you will have a clean society. I think that's one of the first things we're going to be implementing at the planetary level, and hopefully, it'll catch on.
So, first of all, if you are an Asgardian, I won't tell anyone. Secondly, I love that you said that we're zero on Kardashev. Most people don't say that, and it always annoys me because we aren't even we're nowhere near a one, and so we basically default down to zero because of how little of the energy we're able to um, gather and use. And I this device, the name molecular disintegrator is beautiful, and I hope that you use that in production because people would love to buy a molecular disintegrator. It is the greatest machine someone would say that they own. They'd say, "Well, I have
Oh,
I have,
that's a good.
I have a
Take that down
molecular
to now.
disintegrator." I mean, people would buy that just to say they have one of those. I mean, that would just be hilarious. Um, and so, a question about water. And I know we're running out of time here. The question about water and the fact that it is sort of the universal solvent. Do you think, based on that, um, that really the only way life can exist is based on a water planet, or do you think we have other elements and things that life could spring forth from? And I know that's a giant left field question, but it's sort of in your wheelhouse in a way.
Um, well, from a biochemical perspective, you definitely need to have a polar molecule so that you can make more of a complex macromolecules from that point on. And you need a strong polar solvent for you to be able to deal with these mechanisms. I a non-polar world, let's say, because we know other planets are, instead of water, they have oceans of methane, for example, and other, non-polar solvents.
Mhm.
I think it's organic chemistry. It would be impossible on non-polar structures. Anything you think about out in nature, anything that responds to evolutionary dynamics, always have, it always has this patterns that they seem very complex, but by the same token, they're very simple once you figure it out. The theory behind, which makes me wonder um, if everything is by design, and the angle in which the water molecules present itself, so that it has a specific type of polarity. It's so interesting. It's like one of those cosmological constants that doesn't make any sense. Because yes, if you start from scratch, a non-polar solver would make more sense because it's more, let's say, organized, if you will. Just a a number of carbon atoms one after each other. Hydrogen and oxygen atoms after each other. But water has a specific angle. That's not 90 degrees or 45. It's more of an organic random constant, which I think it answers to the same perspective I've been having for many years now, that we live in a simulation. I think it's more likely that we're not based reality than we are based reality, much more likely, because think about the speed of light, the fact that the universe collapses when you look too close, or you're close to the Planck scale, then you have black hole. Like, of course, you're gonna have black hole because you cannot look into it too close. What happened at the Big Bang? It's just ridiculous, right? It's so counterintuitive.
Mhm.
Um, and then you have these cosmological constants that nobody can explain. What about dark matter and dark energy? So also you have the Fermi paradox. You have the great filter idea. You have like um, I in all honesty, I think uh, that a Dyson sphere, or type 2, type 3 civilization mega structure, we should be able to spot one of those pretty soon with the Webb telescope. Otherwise, I, I don't think there's if there's any other type of life that's not water based, it has to be again with a new type of pre-designed type of solvent that does not answer to any logic. It's just a random 98.7 degree molecule. That it's so counterintuitive, like most of the constants that you see out there in the world. So, yeah, I don't think we'll ever find. And I mean, and everybody has done iterations and calculations with different, uh, chemical pathways in combination, and there's nothing even close to water. The fact that water boils at 100 degrees C, um, And if you have any comparable solvent, it phases out at 60 degrees and below, which would be impossible for any life to withstand any macromolecule if you are phasing out in just by staying under the sun. So water is it's so precisely ideal, that there's nothing even close, which is why, I think Timeplast's concept of water solubility will be irrefutable years to come.
Mm. Yeah, it does sound like something that is it's a given, which is easy to say after you've created it, but it sort of sounds like a given, right? And I think what you're doing is amazing, and I don't want to take too much of your time. I know you have another call coming soon, so I wanted to give you sort of a heads up and ask if there was anything you wanted to shout out about or to or what have you.
Oh yeah, thank you for that. I have a and I would like you to help me if that's possible. But I have a project, a personal project, in which I think it could benefit humanity tremendously if we all get together behind this plan. It would be incredible. And the only thing I need is to have a meeting with Elon Musk for this to take off, right? And so I am actively looking to have a meeting with him. I've made a video for him to see. I think that if we get together, the possibility of us starting up a singular city, and having success on that end, so that any human being can be happy, successful, regardless of anything. If you're healthy, that's all everything we need. And so if anybody's hearing this podcast, or if you have any point of contact, second, third degree or whatever, if you can help me out having a meeting with Elon Musk, I would really appreciate it. I'm all seriousness. I think that this could be important for humanity.
I think you're in a position for him to hear you because of your patents and your position and what you've done. I think he typically listens to people who have a track record. I will do everything I can. I will literally reach out directly. Not that I have the tiniest bit of clout in that department, but I will certainly do a reach out directly publicly to see if I can get any support for that as well. So I'd be more than happy to help you with that. I think it's an honorable direction. I think you're aligned with him, that you want to create and you want to help in humanity, and that aligns with me too. That everything I'm doing, I'm just trying to help people. So I think that's absolutely wonderful, and I'm really glad you took advantage of the shout out to mention that project.
Thank you so much, Mark. This has been very interesting. I'm sorry about my English. This spoken language, already a bottleneck for ideas. You cannot. I cannot stress how better I sound in Spanish. You wouldn't believe it.
So for people listening, I'm holding up a mug that has my book called Three Voices, and it's funny you mention that because I actually talk about the speed of. We have three voices. We have the spoken voice, which we're using, and then you're further translating yours into your non-native tongue, and then we have our second voice, which is sort of the playground in our head where we actually replay things, and it's sort of our sandbox. And then we have our first voice, which is our intuition, our gut feeling, our logic, our reasoning. It's that instantaneous yes, you don't even think about it, and their speeds are dramatically different. So that's why when you're working through a problem, you can be completely quiet because you're just in the zone, and that means you're using your first voice and you're just doing. And then you may start to have doubts or think about it or consider something, and now you're back in your second voice. And then sometimes you get a little frustrated, so you speak out loud and now wait, which one is that again? So that you slow it down in the third. So I 100%, and I so appreciate you actually speaking the language that I know, which is there's only one. Well, that and Cold Fusion, but otherwise it's in the language. So I will let you go, and I really appreciate your time.
No, thank you, Mark, and thank you everyone who's been listening through the ramble here.
Take care of yourself.
All right, take care, sir. Bye.
Living life every day, late at night, not okay. All I want, and I pray, all I need are some better days.
Do you have a story to share or a question? If your idea makes it to a podcast, you will receive a shout out as well as a token of my appreciation. Join the community, patreon.com/alchemy for life.
All I need are some better days.